Hello viewers and welcome. Today we are doing a different kind of race, daily race A, which I usually tend to avoid, but with the F40 Ferraris I was very tempted. Now with a horrible qualifying lap, I started in P8, which could have been worse if the people behind me had qualifying laps. But since this is a non-sportsmanship race, nobody really worries about the qualifying and nobody really worries about the rankings, more of a have it all. Anyway, as the lights turn on, it's lights out and away we go, launching using traction control, then turning it off immediately, giving me a very good acceleration. And it seems like the Portuguese player had forgotten to accelerate or missed the lights completely, which pretty much only happens in the race A. As we go into turn 1, hitting the braking zone, a lot of cars and everyone fighting, no one willing to concede position. It's pretty much guaranteed contact between everyone almost, because you can see it's just a lump of red cars, which is basically like a bloodbath, but it's fuel and motor oil instead. Anyway, I make my way clear through turn 1, making sure I'm not in the shadow realm, and then making sure I'm in the inside of turn 4, I believe, because this is a very heavy braking zone, which is super important. But again, tiny mistake leads in a bit of contact and it's basically ping pong all the way through, and it ends up with the German driving going off and me receiving a 5-second penalty, which is a bit harsh considering only one person went off, and I've seen people get away with way more than that and then getting no penalties at all. So it's pretty interesting to see how this game's penalty system is pretty much broken, because although the game will recognize contact, but a lot of the time they do not give penalties if you know how to do it properly. And yes, there is an art to dirty driving in this game, which I've seen a lot of in lower ranked lobbies. Thankfully, I'm not in that lower ranked lobbies anymore. I'm in properly ranked lobbies with a lot of sportsmen. So I can say goodbye to dirty driver and say hello to a new wave of racing people, which is quite interesting, as I've climbed the rank from C to B, and I'm still in sportsmanship B, which I'm still surprised I'm not in A by now, but yeah, stuff happens. The game does actually recognize every bit of contact, but they do not count it as penalties. That is why there is an art to being dirty. Anyway, serving the penalty, that pretty much sends me almost all the way back to the grid, so thinking nothing of it, I take back to work and start overtaking the cars. As you can see, overtaking this one car through this chicane section, which is not a good move, because it ends up with me not only losing the position, but also ends up in me lighting my tires up and losing very valuable speed on a very long straight. So it's gonna be quite interesting as I scrub the barrier here, which again is like literally my first race, and I basically have overall 5 laps of experience on this track. So now it's pedal to the metal all the way from here to turn 1, hoping I catch some sort of slipstream, but I'm way too far off to catch or hope of any slipstream. And you can see the French driver behind me actually quite catching up bit by bit. Anyway, I make a tiny mistake on the braking zone, so I dip my wheels on the sand and ends up in me going a little wide, but I recover immediately, losing minimal time. But it does mean the French driver is now right on my gearbox, which is not welcome, especially in these cars which are not specifically high downforce. So slipping is a very common theme or common occurrence to happen, and you can see me slipping everywhere, everyone's slipping everywhere. And when you got drivers that are not too good with slipping, you get a lot of interesting incidents, such as the same corner, lap 1. And you can see that's a little bit of an incident. He's pretty much shoving me wide or almost spinning me out, but I again think nothing wrong of it, recover and keep my head low and keep looking forwards. Now I'm basically salvaging whatever is left to be salvaged, and it looks not too bad, because I could get up into P6 if I overtake all these cars over here, because they seem to be fighting for P6 or P5 to be specific. And with a bit of scrubbing and a bit of contact through turn 9, I believe I make it into P6, and I'm trying to overtake into P5, but this happens. I'm like, okay, what the hell? Why doesn't he get a penalty for that? But again, this game is very unjust with the penalties, and a lot of the time there is an art to being dirty. I didn't specifically expect players to be dirty, especially in such a high ranked lobby, but again, seems like that was more of a personal move than a actual dirty move, because the pack was fighting a bunch and he probably thought I was one of the drivers that were annoying him, which does happen a lot in these lobbies actually, and it does happen all the way up into the A tier lobbies or the A plus tier lobbies. And you can see interesting tactics from the Brazilian drivers, rubbing the wall or riding the wall, which I thought you would get a penalty for that, but again, there is an art to violating basically every single racing rule here, which is quite interesting. And you lose no sportsmanship or racing points, so this is where you would experiment all the weird stuff. And you can see me making a bit of contact with the Portuguese driver and ending in a half spin, recovering immediately but losing again everything back to the end. Now what happened to my race is gone from bad to worse. So skipping to the end, I end up in P6 with pretty much every other driver either spinning out or receiving a hefty penalty. So it was pretty much an easy P6. Now, into the next race. With a much improved qualifying lap, pretty much more than 11 seconds faster, I end up in P6 with hopes of winning, because even if you're in the last position, you can still win this race. And now the lights start coming on, and it's lights out, and away we go. You can see a couple of drivers, 3 drivers to be exact, jumping the lights, ending up with them receiving a 2 or 3 second penalty, which they have to serve immediately, as they're not allowed to accelerate until they do. So this pretty much gives everyone a chance to overtake them, and they do overtake them, and they end up all 3 in last. And now going through turn 1, I end up nice and clean, making sure no contact is made, making sure I get a very nice exit to get ready to attack the 3 driver pack over there. Catching up one thing and overtaking is another thing, but if you force them into a mistake, there's nothing much they can do, and it's an easy overtake. So this is what most people go for, but when you get to more experienced drivers, making them crack under pressure is very, very, very difficult, unless you're in one of these stupid little races, which is very easy because people are pretty much reckless. And you can see a bit of a fiasco happening there with the Italian driver and another driver that I forgot his name, but it seems like he went all the way back and is pretty much to be forgotten about. And now ends up with me in P2 chasing the Filipino driver up in front, and the Italian being very, very close to me. I'm pretty positive I'm faster than him, but not the Filipino driver, because it seems like he's bought this car for his own, and it seems like he's it seems like he's been driving this car for quite a while, therefore being quite experienced with the car. So skipping forward a bit, going into lap 2, it seems like the Filipino driver makes a tiny mistake, goes on the sand and gets his tires dirty, which will give me a grip advantage into the next few corners, which is only one corner because of the following straight. So it gives me a bit of an advantage, and it ends up with him going a little wild and me taking P1. So skipping another lap, just starting lap 3, into the braking zone, you can see the Filipino driver is pretty much back on my tail and is ready to fight back to take away P1 from me, which I'm not willing to give away so easily. So let's see how he's gonna take it away from me. And you can see me taking all sorts of different lines, making sure I always have the advantage and I know where the track is best for my car. And it seems like this line is the best through here, but again, it's very tricky, especially with that corner, because you have to brake, but you still want to keep a bunch of speed because you can use it down this little straight. And into this braking zone, it's a quite long braking zone, so if you have a bit more speed, you can ride the brakes a bit more, which is sort of more my style when it comes to these types of cars that like to slide a lot. Or more specifically, cars that do not have aerodynamical elements that helps it stick to the ground, which is basically all street cars. So that's why I prefer to ride the brakes with pretty much all street cars, as it's pretty much the better racing style. And you can see me practicing my defense a little bit, taking all sorts of different lines, making the Filipino driver know he's in for a fight. And again, some people will just give up and not attempt to overtake in the beginning, but it seems like he's stubborn and he's keen on the win. So it's gonna be quite interesting what he's gonna do in the 2.5 laps remaining of this race. And me using a bit of mental games before. Again, mental games are pretty much 90% of the race, because maybe you are the best driver in the world, but if you don't have mental games and their mental games work on you, you're not gonna think that you're the best anymore, despite you being faster. So it's all mental games. If you think you're the best, and you have to think you're the best, and you have to genuinely believe you're the best, you're not gonna win. Anyway, through the start of sector 3, you can see me letting him have the inside of that heavy braking zone, but again, I have the inside of the chicane, and then I have the positions, and that gives me the opportunity to smartly manage my car, which is much required, especially with the quite a long straight over there, which ends up in me rubbing the barrier and losing maybe overall 1/10 of a second over that straight, which is not the best, but stuff happens. So he ends up in P1 and I'm slipstreaming him down the straight, which will be quite interesting because, again, with these cars, the long braking zones, you can ride the brakes a little more, which gives you a lot of braking opportunity. I don't know how you call it specifically. I send it down the inside, he goes for the switcheroo, and then I tuck back in his slipstream, making sure I'm ready to attack on the next opportunity. And again, switching the lines, using alternate lines, making sure I'm not too close to him, making sure there is this bit of a gap so I could send it down the braking zone. And you can see him covering it nicely through this very light braking zone, but again, there's a heavy one just right after that, so let's see what I can do over there. And sending it down the outside. Let's see if I'm able to hang it around the outside. It seems like he takes the inside, so I tuck behind him and I'm ready to accelerate away. And this does not seem too good because the more fighting we do, the closer the driver in third will get. So I need to overtake him as soon as possible or work with him so that I don't end up losing P3. But I'm not too concerned about P3, I'm just concerned about the win for now. And you can see me sending it down the inside, and I have no idea, turn 10, turn 9, I've lost count, but I've sent it down the inside, nicely done, up into P1. And now he's going to be fighting the Italian driver and this gives me a bit of breathing room, so all I have to do is build a gap and make sure the Italian driver attacks him very well. So the protocol for this situation is you slow down and you heavily defend, so the Italian driver could get very close to him and you simply accelerate away and let them fight. But it seems like the Filipino driver is smart and he knows how to handle fighting, and he knows he doesn't want to fight too much, so he's also building a gap, which seems like the Italian driver is not too close to the Filipino, which will cause me a bit of trouble leading to the end of this race. Because as we go through sector 3, here comes the corner that I'm quite really bad at, which is this corner. I've always seemed to be losing even maybe a whole second in this corner, because I'm just super awkward through this corner, as up with him being on my tail just through this one singular corner. All the work I do just to make sure he does not overtake on that one singular corner, which is my biggest weak spot, and it seems like he knows it, and it seems like he's ready to abuse it every single time, which he does abuse it this time. And now I'm gonna be stuck in P2 with the Italian driver very close behind. The closer the Italian gets to me and the farther the Filipino gets away from me is gonna be reducing my chances of winning this race, or even ending up with me in P3, which is I'm not too keen on. If I'm gonna finish this race, it's P2 no less, and I'm not accepting any of that. And you can see that the Italian driver is sending it down my rear end, causing me to mess up my braking point and go a bit wild, which this singular mistake from him or intentional incident could lost me the race, because if I did go down the inside very nice and tight and I get a good acceleration out of the corner, the Filipino driver would be in deep trouble. But it seems like the Italian guy is not having any of it, and he's very keen on P2, so ends up with us fighting and the Filipino guy getting away with it. And now you can see how aggressive the Italian is getting, and I'm not too keen on it, so ends up with a bit of contact, a bit of an incident. I just push him a little wide, not too big of a deal considering the little bump he gave me into turn 4, I believe. So now up in P2 with a second to the driver behind and 2 seconds to the driver in front, I am not sure I can win this race, especially with the sector 3 weakness that the Filipino driver knows very well of me. So I'm just keen on finishing the race in P2 and not losing it to P3 now. So as we approach the finish line, you can see the Filipino driver celebrating quite nicely, which I give that to him. That was a really fun race and it was a really fun fight. I'm quite happy with P2 for once in my life.